Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. A very good day to you and welcome to Life Matters. In our health edition today, we're shining a light on a crucial aspect of our well-being, mental health in the workplace, both emotionally and physically. Joining me are two experts in the field, HR specialist Leilah Essop and Dr. Stanley Arumugam, counseling psychologist. Together, we'll explore the challenges, solutions, and best practices for prioritizing mental health at work. So let's get started. And firstly, let me introduce Dr. Stanley Arumugam, specializes in the integration of spirituality and psychotherapy. He's also the author of Desperation to Destiny, Finding God in Your Journey of Healing. He has also worked in corporate roles and is passionate about managing stress, burnout, and well-being in the workplace and helps clients deal with toxic cultures. A very good day to you, Dr. Stanley, and a warm welcome to Life Matters.
Good day, and thank you for having me.
Only a pleasure. So excited to start the show. Then, of course, our second guest with over 2 decades of dedicated experience in human resources, or HR consulting, transformation, and leadership development, Leilah brings a myriad of expertise to the table. Her passion lies in empowering both individuals and organizations to realize their utmost potential and purpose, as well as aiming to foster an environment where individuals and businesses not only thrive, but flourish in a diverse and inclusive setting. Assalamu alaikum to you, Leilah, and welcome to the show.
Wa alaikum salam. Shukran for having me.
Only a pleasure. So let's get this conversation started on this Workers' Day, 1st of May, and something that we want to highlight and look forward to as we elaborate on the mental health. So, Doc, if I could start with you, and before we actually start with some of the most common mental health challenges faced by employees in the workplace, maybe let's start with why you got into this workspace of psychology. And was it maybe a personal story that led you on this path, Doc?
Thank you. The topic of mental health in the workplace is especially important for me at a personal level and at an organization level. I studied psychology, did a master's in counseling, and later a PhD. And my topic was stress and burnout. And I entered the workplace pretty much as a HR officer, and then progressed through the ranks up to director level. And as I went higher up, the stress of the roles became increasingly more significant. And I eventually found myself in a corporate role that took a whole lot out of me, eventually leading me to burnout. And so I just wanted to share that story because I specialized in stress and burnout, and I personally experienced the very thing that I studied. To say that none of us are exempt from stress in the workplace, we would all experience stress in the workplace. We can prevent burnout, but to know the signs of that. So education is important, but also to pay attention to our day-to-day situation and circumstances that show up.
So, very interesting that you pointed out that the very thing that you studied and focused on was something that you experienced, and I want to bring that in a little bit later. But let's look at some of the most common mental health challenges faced by employees in the workplace today.
Yeah. To start off with I wanted to answer the question also, is this a big problem? Is it a problem? To take it fully from a business perspective, the World Health Organization issued a statistic which says that globally, mental health production loss counts to $1 trillion.
Sure.
So if anyone needs to be convinced that this is a serious issue in the workplace, that's quite a sobering statistic. But what are the common mental health issues? I think we all experienced during COVID a significant increase in mental health conditions. They were there before, but they became a lot bigger for a lot of people. And these were typically the clinical conditions of depression, anxiety, and an increasing number of suicides that spiked during that period, largely due to isolation, being only having to stay at home and not be in the workplace. So those come really from COVID, but pre and post-COVID, there are other conditions that impact mental health and people struggle with. Many organizations for many years have focused on addictions, alcohol, drug addiction, and increasingly burnout is almost on the back of workaholism, and we can talk a little bit about that. There are specific workplace challenges that are being more identified and addressed now. Things like harassment, bullying, and just being in toxic cultures. All of that also impacts mental health in the workplace. And then I particularly wanted to highlight mental health in respect of women. I think that's an area that we don't talk about. Women have a double burden of work, both at the workplace and at home. And in the workplace, because many workplaces have a gender bias, women, again, have to often prove themselves, adding an added stress in terms of how they show up at work. And they also have very limited support structures compared to men in the workplace. So all of these are just different manifestations of mental health issues in the workplace.
So taking in consideration, you mentioned COVID. Has anything changed, and has any of the employees, or even in your industry, the psychologists, come across certain instances that actually was influenced because of COVID, and has it changed differently the way you look at how you treat people today in the context of this?
Sure. I think COVID brought an increased awareness in the workplace to mental health. So many organizations recognize that there's more to well-being than just the physical aspects, which a lot of companies did pay attention to. But during COVID, everyone was affected, from the CEO to the shop floor worker. And so there's been an increased awareness of mental health conditions. Those that I mentioned, anxiety, depression, suicide, and another that was amplified was grief due to loss of loved ones. Often that was traumatic grief because people could not say goodbye to their loved ones, and there were families that had multiple bereavements. So all of that has been a significant impact. Even now in my practice, I'm still counseling people that have lost loved ones during COVID. So that is one of the areas that I notice and will continue to be a reality in the workplace, where even colleagues have been lost. And so we continue to recognize and mourn those.
Something that has just come up for me now, Dr. Stanley, is loss of income. Many people had actually lost their businesses. There maybe were a possible reduction in salary, or even, nothing in that fact. How has individuals recovered from that? Is that still an issue today?
I think it's an ongoing issue, especially for small business. It's been more difficult to get back. I think those that are in the corporate space have more of a cushioning and absorption for that. But certainly for those that are in small business spaces, it's been much more difficult to bounce back. And I don't think we have a lot of supporting structures to make that possible. So that's a very real issue for those people.
Let's talk about employees. How can they create a possibly supportive work environment for the employees, mental well-being, and looking at both mentally and physically, and as well as taking some initiatives to strengthen mental health, even though it's maybe not existent in some employees?
I think if we recognize that most people that have the privilege of working spend most of the time at work, then that says something for us already. So I want to say, just as we take care to make sure that our homes are places that we feel safe and we can grow and thrive. Similarly, if we're spending more of our time at work, then there's a responsibility for organizations to create supportive work environments. And so it becomes a leadership responsibility at the start. And leaders are responsible for both results and people. And we know that organizations that focus on people can also get the benefit of better results. So it's not a win-lose, it's a win-win. And how does it translate? It translates into policies, procedures, and programs, and maybe Leilah will talk more about that. So organizations that are conscious and take employee well-being seriously and the duty of care can create supportive environments.
Awesome. So, Leilah, if I could bring you in here, what can companies do to create certain policies? As Dr. Stanley mentioned, what policies and procedures can organizations and companies implement to support these employees' mental health?
Thank you. So there's a lot of policies that are already existent. So the employment equity policy protects employees from the perspective of not being unfairly discriminated against based on mental illness or illness as such. There's disability policies, which now have included mental illnesses. So like Dr. Stanley mentioned, the depression and anxiety are all covered in those disability policies. There's employee assistance programs, and we'll talk a lot more about those, but those are programs that corporate companies put into place to make sure that employees are well taken care of. Something that companies can implement is a retrenchment policy that states that they will only go through one retrenchment cycle a year. So as you know, retrenchment really is a delicate time for a lot of people. There's job insecurity, but there's also the awareness of unemployment in the country. So that makes people feel quite uneasy. It's a long process that employees go through. And so if a company can try and, reduce that to at least once a year, that would be great. There's diversity, equity, and inclusion. So making sure that employees feel valued and feel cared for. There's reward and appreciation policies. So companies can define how they want to show appreciation to employees. There's leave policies, and they can implement something called mental health leave. So it's in addition to sick leave, and it's in addition to annual leave, and it falls under the category of reasonable accommodation when you talk about disabilities. So there really are a lot of things that companies can do, and policies and procedures they can implement to assist the employees.
I want to discuss later how employees can actually, take the stand, and after this short break, discuss some common health challenges faced by employees. But don't forget, you can interact with us. We have a WhatsApp line as well as our social media pages. We love how you make the show. So please tell us what you think about Workers' Day. What does it really mean to you? It'll be very interesting to know from every aspect of your workplace as well. Or if you're even running a business, what are the challenges that you face? But more on mental health in the workplace just after this on Life Matters. Back in a moment. Welcome back. A very good day to you. This is Life Matters, and in every show, this edition, workers' lives matter. So online we have Dr. Stanley, who is a consultant and coach to global NGOs and also works with leadership teams in the human rights and humanitarian space, as well as Leilah Essop in her role as CEO at Infinitely Different. Leilah Essop provides essential coaching and training services aimed at addressing South Africa's pressing issues of unemployment and skills gap. So to continue this conversation of understanding mental health in the workspace, we want to just latch on with Dr. Stanley quickly. Doc, if you could just advise us, what role do managers specifically, your direct manager, your supervisor, play in identifying and possibly supporting employees with their mental health issues?
That's a great question. I think all of us can look back on our lives and we'd all identify a teacher that was very instrumental in shaping our lives. And in our work experience, similarly, if I look back, I can think of the line managers that have positively impacted my life. And so a line manager is very significant in how we experience work and just our contribution to the workplace. So line managers can or make or break mental health in the workplace. And so for organizations that do take mental health seriously, that do take well-being seriously, line managers would have a key performance indicator related to mental health. And that is commendable. It's a best practice. But at the team level, the line manager acts as a team leader, supervisor, or even a coach. And in those spaces, again, we speak about creating psychologically safe teams. And those teams that are psychologically safe are teams where people can be free to speak without being judged. People are free to express alternatives or different ideas without being shut down. And where people feel safe to bring up issues of concern. And so psychologically safe teams can be created. And so those emerge from line managers that are conscious, that want to create a supportive work environment. So that's at a very practical level. And as a line manager, I think compassion is also important. I treat your staff as you would treat others. And so even a line manager as a boss or another manager, and often we transfer our experience of our boss with us to our staff. And so it also becomes important then to recognize that the role of the line manager is very, very much connected with the culture of the organization. If the culture of the organization is very demanding, driven, results-focused, then that is sometimes what the line manager passes down onto his or her team. So it's important in that sense to be conscious of the organizational culture and how it can be shaped differently.
How you want to be treated, that's how you treat the people that's working under you. So whether it be the employee or your supervisor, your manager, how do they ensure compliance with mental health related laws and regulations?
Different companies have different ways. Companies that do have policies and procedures related to well-being then would have metrics or measurements. And often this might even be included in a performance contract with the line manager. So that's one. The other aspects on a more severe level, if you like, would relate to issues around harassment or bullying. Again, those are captured in policies. And if there are any infringements around that, then there would be disciplinary procedure or counseling that's required. So we depend a lot on the organization's policies and procedures to guide our commitment to mental health in the workplace.
Thank you, Dr. Stanley. So Leilah, from your point of view as an HR specialist, taking into context with certain regulations, certain laws and implementations that's actually existent, what would you say are the possible compliances when it does come to practicing these laws and practicing these health-related specific indications where something is put down and the line manager or the supervisor has to adhere to that before it goes to someone higher up? How can these employers ensure that compliance and mental health-related laws and regulations are actually fulfilled?
Thank you. So the first thing is that the Constitution enshrines equality and dignity. And I think from there follows the policies of the company. there's the Labor Relations Act that prohibits unfair discrimination and unfair dismissal. So if an employee is experiencing something and it's, directly with their line manager or their supervisor, that's when HR steps in and make sure that the policies are followed. So there is a policy to follow if you are being harassed. There's a policy to follow if you're ill and you can't be at work. And so it's just a matter of taking it to HR and ensuring that they make sure that you are not unfairly dismissed from your position.
How visible should these policies be? Because sometimes you come into buildings and you see HR policies up on the wall, employment, policies, whether it be leave, whether it be, harassment, whether it be just compliance, regulations of how to treat, a customer when they walk in, and the rights of employees as well. How visible should these rules and regulations be to the employee, working in a building or in a shop, for instance?
So legislation states that the Labor Relations Act needs to be visible and displayed in common areas.
Okay.
But for me, it's more important that it's lived by the company and that everyone is aware of it. It becomes part of the company culture, that people talk about it often, and it's encouraged to speak to your employees about it. It shouldn't be something that's hidden that you pull out when you go into a disciplinary hearing. It's not something that an employee should just see on their first day of work. It's something that should be lived by the company.
Dr. Stanley, if I can pose this question to you when it comes to effective strategies for managing workplace stress, promoting resilience, and when do you know possibly that one should seek help when it comes to if it's needed, and if you understand the policies that's in place with the company, and often that's blurred when the employee doesn't, who do I go to, who do I speak to, can I go directly to HR, or is it something that I have to bring up to the attention of my line manager if that person is possibly the problem? So let's look at some effective strategies for managing, workplace stress, and perhaps looking at when do you speak out when it's needed?
I think all of us have to take responsibility for our mental well-being and health. So it starts with me, and that means I need to be mindful of my capacity. I've just got a rubber band on my hand here. It's a good illustration for, I got to know what my stretch is and what my capacity is. And so to notice triggers, what might be upsetting me, am I more anxious, am I feeling more depressed? And so all of those are signs that we need to pay attention to. That's an indication that I need to listen and do something about this. So when you pay attention to those signs, then what do you do? If you have a supportive line manager, that'll be a great place to start, to have that conversation with your line manager to say, look, here's where I am, I'm not coping, I need some help. And so that conversation is always helpful if you have that supportive line manager. So that's the first port of call. If that is not in place, then go speak to HR. HR's responsibility is also organizational well-being. And many HR practitioners are trained to be that first line of support and referral. And if you don't want to use those organizational channels, then go out. Most people around mental health issues often engage their GP as a first point of contact. And often a GP then would refer to a psychologist. If you do have a psychologist or you've been in some kind of counseling, then you can go directly there. So there are different ways of getting help. I think part of the challenge is recognizing that I need the help and going and seeking it. I think a lot of us get stuck to think that we will be okay. It's just something, it's a bad time, I'll get through this, and then it just accumulates and becomes more of an issue down the line.
I want to look after the short break some practical strategies for employees implementing mental health friendly policies, whether it be flexible working hours, mental health days, as Leilah mentioned, and creating a supportive work environment within the space of highlighting mental health. More just after the short break. Stay with us. Don't forget, we have our WhatsApp line and our social media pages that we'd like you to interact with us. So please tell us what your thoughts are on Workers' Day and highlighting some of the aspects that we could possibly work through the next show. But for now, let's quickly pay the bills. We'll come back with more just after this. Mental health in the workplace, highlighting on Workers' Day, the 1st of May, is something of a discussion, not just on Workers' Day, but to promote it throughout the year. If it's something that you don't see at your work, initiate it. Talk to staff. If you might not be the supervisor, the line manager involved, approach the necessary people in your department, heading that organization, for instance. Or just, if you're running a small business, maybe this is the time to look at your staff, have a one-on-one, whether it is highlighting Mental Health Day or just have a session where you need to find out what's happening with that individual, why they're running late, what is the environment like at home that could possibly influence them to perform better at work. So these conversations needs to be had. We have online with us Dr. Stanley, who is a psychologist and has a great passion with regards to burnout and well-being in the workplace, and HR specialist Leilah Essop, who has a degree in industrial psychology and management development program in the broad-based Black economic empowerment. She's specialized in transition coaching for new managers, change management, and promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion within the workplace. So we want to understand what are some of the best practices. So Leilah, if you could just engage with us when it comes to the workplace, and how employers can possibly create, mental health friendly work environment within that culture, best practices, and how employers can engage with their workers in mental health initiatives and also encourage their participation.
Okay. So with employee engagement, we need to realize, or employee involvement, we need to realize that working from home has been very different to coming back into the office. So at home, I was in a safe space. I had my own, my own enclosed space. I didn't have to interact with many people. I didn't have to answer questions about why you're upset, how are you feeling, how are things going. And so coming back into a workspace, something as small as working in an open plan environment can have a huge impact on somebody when they haven't been around people for almost 2 years. So that's something to consider. Bright lights, noise cancelling headphones, having quiet rooms and quiet spaces where people can retreat when things get too much. When it becomes too much and they can't handle it anymore, there's a place that they can go and just cut out all of the noise and center themselves before returning back to the workplace. So there's a lot of little things that the company can do. But one of the important things is making sure that this is a top-down initiative. I often hear employees when I do training say, I wish my manager was here. I wish the director was here. I wish the CEO was here. I wish they knew what you're telling us. And so it's important for senior management to be vulnerable and open up themselves and create that psychological safety that says, I too get stressed. I've experienced burnout. And make it the norm. Make talking about this the norm. It shouldn't be something that happens on Mental Health Awareness Day or Mental Illness Day. It's something that should be spoken about openly and honestly. But in order to do that, you need to start training them and training the managers on how to get rid of their own unconscious biases, how to understand when somebody comes to you, what are the steps that you take? How do you confront the situation? How do you know where the line is between confidentiality and disclosing what the person's now discussing with you? So training managers is really, really important. Coaching is really helpful in the work environment, not just for employees, but for managers as well, because we sometimes assume that they're in their closed off office and they're doing well, and we don't necessarily give them the attention that they need. So this is something that needs to be run company-wide.
Sorry to break you there, Leilah. I like the idea that you say empower the managers, because often you think, all you have to do as a manager is know your job, keep employees or the people working under you in check, but not go to that length of understanding where they're at. So you spoke about coaching as well. How does that just lie with the manager themselves, or does it actually roll down to the employees to help them better cope with the environment?
The nice thing about coaching is that it's accessible to anybody in the company, or should be accessible to anyone in the company. Because all that coaching is an external set of ears and eyes to help you understand and help you see the way through. So a coach doesn't tell you what to do. A coach listens to you and asks you strategic questions to help you work your way out of the situation. So coaching is something that anybody can do, but there have been some really creative initiatives that have come up recently. Some companies have yoga classes and meditation rooms. Some companies have prayer rooms and quiet rooms. There's sleep chambers. There's financial wellness classes. And the financial wellness classes help employees to deal with their budgets, to put together a budget, to stick to the budget, to talk about job security, and financial security, how to put money away. Some companies have gone as far as having sleep chambers. So if you're not feeling well, you go and you have a nap and you come back to work. So there's gym memberships. There's really lots of things that companies are doing. But the sad thing is not all companies are doing it. And for those companies who can't afford to have specific programs and run these things in-house, there are organizations like SADC, the South African Depression and Anxiety Group. There's Lifeline. And so there's shelters. Stanley alluded to it earlier on, is that there's also been an increased number of people who are, or women that are finding themselves in shelters because of physical and emotional abuse. So HR's role and managers' roles are to have that information readily available and to be able to give it to staff when they need it. But also just to have the emotional maturity to notice that something is wrong. Yeah. These people, you've worked with them for years, to spot that, she's not well today, or something's wrong, something in her. She's normally never this quiet, or I noticed that she's, wearing more makeup than usual. Is she hiding something? Or this person's been acting strange. Let me just reach out and make sure that they're okay. Yeah. Like Stanley mentioned, when suicide happens, everybody says, but the signs were there. Sometimes we're so self-absorbed and so focused on targets and productivity that we don't notice those things in people.
Yeah. I'm so glad that you've mentioned the human part of it as a HR human resource individual, as an expert in the industry, and looking at ways of just being a person and reaching out to the next person as an individual. So the role of HR often is just put in a corner, and it only happens when somebody needs something. What relationship should employers, at least employees, have with HR when it comes to not just coming to them, I need to change something on my leave form, or I need assistance with, something that's happening at home, but a question that I posed to Stanley earlier on, because sometimes your line manager, your supervisor, is actually the problem, and they're not the person that's maybe the most approachable person when it comes to it. But going to HR, maybe, what are the steps one can follow when you're not happy with your line manager or your supervisor, for somebody that's in charge of your work? And taking it a little bit further, going to HR, what are the processes? Could you just advise individuals when it does come to an issue like that?
So I unfortunately really hate the stigma attached to going to HR, because it's almost like I'm escalating you and I'm taking you to HR. Yes, in some cases, when it's it's serious, like harassment, bullying, then absolutely there's a grievance procedure that you follow. Every company has one. And then you formally take your manager or, take your manager to HR. But HR should be a place where you go, where you know that it's safe and you know that you talk to them and everything that you discuss is confidential and they know how to handle these matters and they will do so with professionalism. So they have a repository of places that they can refer you to if they are unable to assist you. They have the policies and the knowledge of the policies to be able to assist. And it's just a safe space to be able to go to. The other thing is HR is also the go-between sometimes between senior management and managers and staff, so they can apply for budgets. So if you come up with a great idea and say, you know what, I think we could use a space in the basement and we could turn it like this. Can you get us budget? Or I think I need noise cancelling headphones because I get very overwhelmed and triggered with all of this noise. HR is able to step in and provide you with those things.
Okay, wow. So employers actually do have the right to make suggestions and go up to HR instead of maybe if the line manager is not as approachable. So that is the facility there, and take advantage of the human resource department if you have one. And as we highlight mental health in the workplace, we're chatting to psychologist Dr. Stanley as well as Leilah, HR specialist, and we want your interaction as well. So please do tell us your thoughts and any issues, even if it's a relative or somebody that you know, a friend that does need help within their workplace. You know, maybe we can assist. Contact us via our various social pages, and maybe we can even have a follow-up show with our guest. But now we need to quickly pay the bills. We'll be back in a moment, just after this. Welcome back. Our last few minutes as we highlight Workers' Day, 1st of May, and mental health in the workplace is something that must absolutely be practiced in your working environment. If it's not, try and initiate it, and don't be scared, because you might not be affected by, you know, a mental health condition, but somebody next door to you or somebody on the other floor, for instance, could possibly just need that push from you. So it is everybody's problem. So online we have Dr. Stanley, who's a psychologist and has great passion when it comes to mental health within the workplace, as well as HR specialist Leilah Essop. So Dr. Stanley, if I could latch on to you and something that I wanted to speak about, because you mentioned it earlier on, and something that you've been personally affected with rather, is burnout. What exactly is it, and what can people watch out for when it does come to burnout symptoms that they could recognize?
We all experience some level of stress in the workplace, some more than others. And if you imagine almost a curve, so when we're experiencing stress, we are able to manage it, and that gets us to do our work well. So we're kind of on the optimal side. But if we go on the other side of that curve, when our capacity does not match the demand placed on us, that's when we experience stress. And if we experience the stress for a week, for a month, and continuous, that continuous stress leads to what we describe as burnout. So burnout is not something that happens overnight. It's not an event. It's the end result of a longer process of being consistently in a stressful state. And so what do we notice in terms of burnout symptoms? It could be emotional detachment or disconnection. If I am a supervisor, I don't want to see my staff. I just want to be away from them. So that disconnection. Or even my colleagues, I don't want to come to the workplace. Or it could be just on the physical side. It could manifest in especially depression, where I just want to get into myself and feel a loss of energy, there's a fatigue that overcomes me in that. And then also from a mental perspective, just the thoughts that I have are mostly negative. They are self-critical, and I just feel like I'm stuck. I'm stuck in a hole that I can't get. And so burnout is expressed and experienced both physically, mentally, and also spiritually. Those that have a faith orientation, and we all do, but some of us, we cannot express that in the workplace. You have a sense of almost distance. I'm feeling so isolated. I'm feeling away from God. And that's also a spiritual darkness. We sometimes speak of the dark night of the soul. So burnout is a progressive phase, and mostly people around you start to notice it. And so pay attention to that. But if you experience any of the symptoms I've described, then you may need to seek help for that.
Awesome. And that's so good to recognize it. And something that we don't often talk about, and this was going to come in the show, it's about stigma. Let's talk about the stigma attached to mental health in the workplace, Dr. Stanley, why that is the case, and how we possibly as individuals ourselves, and which will, hopefully filter through to the managers and the employees, better this negative stigma and encourage open conversations.
I think for many of us, our earliest memory of mental health comes with our conversation about someone being mad. And so that very strong word sticks with us. So we think, we often associate mental health with a severe mental illness. And that idea of mad sticks with us. And we don't want to be identified as mad. But if you look at mental health and illness on a continuum, we recognize that there's a part of our mental well-being that is very related to our normal growth. If we lose someone, we're going to experience bereavement and grief. And if we don't cope with that, that can progress into a mental health issue. For us that are changing jobs, it's a big transition. For us that are changing places, moving from one town to another big transition. All of these are developmental stresses, but if we aren't able to manage them well enough, they can become more severe. And so I want to suggest that mental illness and mental health, the stigma around it is often related to our interpretation of the events, and many times we think we're the only ones that are experiencing it.
Yeah.
But if you conduct a short conversation in your workplace, you'll find everybody experiences some mental health challenge at different levels of severity. But we don't have the confidence and space to be able to speak about that as openly, so we hold a lot of that inside. And I guess part of it also comes from our cultural and religious backgrounds, where we're not encouraged to admit not being well. It might be a sign of spiritual weakness, or in our cultures, it might be frowned upon. So we grow up believing that it's a bad thing to speak about our mental health.
Thank you so much, Dr. Stanley. And I think from there, Leilah, if you could just latch on to that point that Dr. Stanley has made with regards to the stigma and how that can be eradicated in the workplace, as well as how organizations can possibly track, and measure and the impact that they've maybe, encouraged certain mental health initiatives on employees' well-being. And how they can progressively look at it as a continuous practice, and how it would possibly affect productivity in a positive way.
So the role of HR is to encourage these conversations, to walk around the workplace. In my opinion, an HR person shouldn't be in an office somewhere in a corner. They should actually be looking around and noticing what's going on, discouraging working after hours. So there's many companies that have WhatsApp that run until 10 or 11 at night.
Yeah.
There's managers that send emails and expect it to be responded to, at ridiculous hours. And that all contributes towards stress and burnout. In terms of leave management, HR should be saying it is compulsory to take at least 2 to 3 days of leave every 3 months. And that's timeouts to be able to just recoup, regather, and then come back to work refreshed. So there's a lot of things that HR can do. In terms of the bias, I think it's just about creating open, honest conversations, encouraging it, creating platforms for it to happen. So be it fireside chats or webinars or conversations, just internally, in terms of within the team, sitting with each team and just having open, honest conversations and letting people know that there is no fear. You're not going to lose your job. You're not going to be victimized. You can be open and honest and just speak about what you're feeling, because chances are the person sitting next to you is experiencing the same thing. And so eventually it shouldn't be an HR thing. It should be something that's handled, at a supervisor or manager level, because managers and supervisors should be equipped and educated to be able to handle those things. So the metrics we use are employee engagement surveys and seeing how happy people are. But quite honestly, those are normally just happy sheets, as I call them, because employees are afraid to speak about it. But when you walk around and you observe and you see what's going on and you see how managers are interacting with the employees and how employees are engaging with each other, I think that's a truer reflection.
So unfortunately, that's where we have to leave it. Dr. Stanley, thank you so much for your time, as well as Leilah. As we wrap up another enlightening episode of Life Matters, we thank you, of course, for tuning in into our Workers' Day special mental health in the workplace. Our guest, Dr. Leilah Essop, HR specialist, and Dr. Stanley Arumugam, coaching psychologist. Thank you so much for your time, both of you. They both shared valuable insight and practical tips for creating a supportive environment. Thank you so much, Dr. Stanley, once again for joining us. A very good day to you, and hope you enjoy the rest of your retreat, as well as you, Leilah Essop, for your time. Assalamu alaikum, and thank you guys once again.
Thank you.
Goodbye, doctor. So remember, mental health matters, and in every conversation this counts. So let's continue the discussion and prioritize our well-being. So within this Workers' Day edition, we hope you enjoyed it, and do join us for our next show as we bring you our Dreamland Diary series for your little ones, and that's helping your little ones sleep with sleep consultant Sada Bibi Patel. Join us next time as we continue to explore holistic approaches to wellness. Until then, happy Workers' Day, take care of yourself and prioritize your health. Goodbye from all of us here at Life Matters in Johannesburg. Wassalamu alaikum.